You will die in prison. 5-year-old boy sentenced to life for killing his mother. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. I still remember the first time I saw the courthouse footage. 5-year-old Miles Harper, barely tall enough to see over the defendant's table, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that swallowed his tiny frame. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered a sentence that would shake the foundations of our justice system. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole for a child. In 30 years of investigating criminal cases, I've never witnessed anything like it. I tell the camera, my voice steady despite the weight of the words. A kindergartner sentenced to spend his entire life behind bars. My name is Daniel Reed. I was the lead investigator at the Meadow Falls Police Department when Hannah Harper was found dead at the bottom of her staircase. What began as a routine investigation into an apparent accident soon spiraled into a media sensation that divided our quiet town and raised disturbing questions about truth, justice, and how far we'll go to find anyone to blame. The cameras had captured it all. Miles's confused expression as he looked around the packed courtroom, the tears streaming down the faces of court officers who'd seen the worst of humanity but never this, the frenzied flashes of press photographers documenting a moment that would haunt our collective conscience. "He doesn't understand what's happening," whispers a court clerk in recorded audio. "He keeps asking when he can go home." I've spent the last 15 years trying to understand what really happened that day in the Harper home. Why a respected elementary school teacher with no history of accidents or health issues suddenly fell to her death. Why a child barely old enough to tie his shoelaces became the prime suspect. And why so many people were determined to believe he was guilty. Meadow Falls wasn't always like this. Before the tragedy, we were just another picturesque American town. Tree-lined streets, 4th of July parades, neighbors who knew each other's names and brought casseroles when someone was sick. Hannah Harper was part of that fabric, beloved by students, active in community events, the kind of single mother other parents admired for making it all work. The investigation files show Hannah leaving her son with a babysitter that morning, heading out for errands. Security cameras captured her at the local supermarket at 10:42 a.m. She spoke with a neighbor at approximately 1:15 p.m. By 5:30 that evening, she was dead. Initial reports labeled it an accident, a tragic fall, nothing more. But something about the scene didn't add up. The position of Hannah's body, the broken banister that seemed to have given way, the lack of defensive wounds. And then there was what the babysitter reported. Miles, tearful and confused that night, saying words that would change everything. "Mommy fell because I was bad." 5 simple words from a child who had just lost his mother. Words that would be twisted, reinterpreted, and ultimately used to build a case that defied all logic and decency. Words that would rob a grieving child of his freedom and his future. As I turn the pages of the case file in my office, the yellow light casting shadows across faded photographs and witness statements, I can't help but wonder, what did we miss? Who benefited from pinning this tragedy on a child? And why, after all these years, am I still the only one asking these questions? The answer, I fear, lies buried in the details we overlooked, in the rush to close the case, in the faces that vanished from the investigation, and in the shadows of a system more concerned with finding a conviction than finding the truth. Tomorrow, we're going to start at the beginning, I tell my producer as the camera light blinks off. There's something about Hannah's ex-husband that never made it into the official record. Meadow Falls was the kind of town that appeared in lifestyle magazines, quaint storefronts, well-kept gardens, and an enviable safety record. The last murder had been 15 years earlier, a bar fight gone wrong. That's why Hannah Harper's death shook us to the core. Hannah was sunshine in human form, says Diane Miller, Hannah's colleague at Meadow Falls Elementary. In recovered interview footage, her eyes glisten with tears. She made teaching look effortless. The kids adored her. The Harper home on Willow Street was modest but charming, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a tire swing hanging from the oak tree in the front yard. Police photographs show a living room with children's books stacked neatly on shelves, finger paintings taped to the refrigerator, and a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. All signs of a normal, loving household. But as I dig deeper into Hannah's life, complications emerge. Her personal calendar, recovered from her laptop, shows therapy appointments scheduled every other Tuesday. Email correspondence with a friend mentions finally feeling strong enough to move forward. What was Hannah trying to overcome? Single motherhood wasn't easy for her, admits Beth Turner, Hannah's closest friend. But she never complained. Miles was her world. Video from Miles's fourth birthday party just 6 months before the tragedy shows a laughing, gap-toothed boy blowing out candles, while Hannah watches adoringly. The image stands in stark contrast to the courtroom footage, where the same child sits bewildered in oversized prison clothes. The timeline of Hannah's final day was meticulously reconstructed during the investigation. Babysitter Lily Patel arrived at 8:30 a.m. Hannah left shortly after, running errands that included the bank, grocery store, and a coffee shop where the barista remembered her seeming distracted but polite. What wasn't included in the official report was Hannah's final stop, a visit to her lawyer's office. We only discovered this later through cell phone records that placed her there from 2:15 to 3:20 p.m. She never mentioned needing legal advice. Beth says in her interview, "I would have gone with her." Hannah returned home around 4:00 p.m. according to Lily, who left shortly after. Miles was playing with his toys. Hannah seemed tired but fine. That's the last time I saw her. The 911 call came at 5:47 p.m. It wasn't Hannah who made it, but her brother Sam, who had stopped by unexpectedly and found her at the bottom of the stairs. The recording captures his panic. "My sister, she's not breathing. I think she fell. Please hurry." When first responders arrived at 5:55 p.m., Hannah Harper was already gone. The medical examiner would later determine the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall downstairs. But two details troubled me from the start: the broken banister that seemed to have been loosened beforehand, and the absence of defensive wounds you'd typically see when someone tries to break their fall. Most disturbing was the statement from Miles later that evening. When Lily returned to look after him while police processed the scene, she reported him saying, "Mommy fell because I was bad." Those 5 words became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Child psychologists were divided. Some argued it was typical guilt response from a child. Others suggested it indicated knowledge of causation. What none of us knew then was that Hannah had recently changed her will, and someone who wasn't present at the scene stood to gain significantly from her death. As I review the evidence in my office years later, a photograph slips from the file. Hannah with a man, whose face has been carefully cut out. Written on the back in Hannah's handwriting, "If anything happens, look for Jack." Who was Jack? And why was his name never mentioned during the trial that sent a 5-year-old to prison for life? Jack Avery. The name stared back at me from faded documents I'd spent months tracking down. Hannah Harper's ex-husband and Miles's biological father, a man whose existence had been systematically erased from the official investigation. "It's like he was a ghost," I tell the camera, spreading photographs across my desk. No interviews, no alibi check, not even listed as a person of interest. In a case where a child was sentenced to life imprisonment, how does the father completely vanish from the equation? The answer came in fragments. First, court records showing Hannah had filed for sole custody 2 years before her death. Then a restraining order, citing erratic behavior and verbal intimidation. Finally, financial documents revealing Jack's mounting gambling debts, over $200,000 by the time Hannah died. Hannah never talked about Miles's father, Beth Turner explains in new footage. Her expression darkens. When I asked once, she just said, "Hey, he's not in the picture anymore, and that's for the best." I respected her privacy and didn't push, but someone should have pushed. Someone should have asked why a man with a history of aggression, financial problems, and a restraining order wasn't investigated when his ex-wife died under suspicious circumstances. I tracked down Melissa Cortez, the prosecuting attorney who built the case against Miles. Now a Superior Court judge, she initially refuses an interview. When I mention Jack Avery's name, her demeanor shifts. "That case was by the book," she says stiffly, avoiding eye contact. We followed the evidence. But did you? I counter. Because I have the full case file and there's not a single mention of Jack Avery being interviewed. Some decisions in high-profile cases are made above my pay grade, she finally admits, a crack in her professional facade. I was told to focus on the evidence we had. That evidence centered on three elements: Miles's statement about being bad, a child psychologist's assessment that Miles displayed concerning behaviors, and a collection of crayon drawings found in his room that supposedly depicted violence. Dr. Rebecca Lawrence, the child psychologist who testified against Miles, agreed to review the case 15 years later. As she studies the drawings on camera, her face falls. These are typical drawings for a 4-year-old, she says, visibly distressed. The red crayon marks interpreted as blood are common in children's artwork, and this figure they claimed was pushing someone downstairs is clearly a child on a slide. She pauses, removing her glasses. I never saw these original drawings during the trial. I was shown photocopies with written interpretations attached. The manipulation of evidence was just the beginning. Sam Harper, Hannah's brother who found her body, had testified that Miles was alone with Hannah when he arrived. Security footage from a neighbor's house, never submitted to court, shows Sam arriving at the Harper home at 4:32 p.m., nearly an hour before he called 911. I was in shock, Sam says defensively when confronted with this discrepancy. Time gets fuzzy in traumatic situations. Perhaps. But what about the life insurance policy Sam helped Hannah set up just months before her death? The policy that named Sam, not Miles, as the primary beneficiary if anything happened to her? That was Hannah's decision, Sam insists, color draining from his face. She wanted to make sure Miles would be taken care of by someone she trusted. But Miles wasn't taken care of. He was locked away, while Sam collected $750,000. As troubling as these revelations are, they pale in comparison to what I discover when I finally locate Jack Avery. Public records show him living under an assumed name in a town just 30 miles from Meadow Falls. Credit card statements place him in a hotel less than a mile from Hannah's house the night before and the day of her death. I need to know where you were when Hannah died, I say when I finally confront him outside his apartment. He freezes, then offers a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. My name isn't Jack. But as he turns to walk away, I notice something that sends a chill through me. A distinctive tattoo on his wrist, partially visible beneath his watch. It matches exactly a design Hannah had described in her restraining order documentation. A compass rose with a dagger through it. The cameras capture the moment perfectly. When I mention the tattoo, Jack's face transforms from confident denial to something darker. She took everything from me, he hisses, dropping the pretense. My son, my money, my name. Do you have any idea what that's like? What he says next isn't a confession, but it's close enough to make me wonder, how many people knew Jack was in town that day? And why didn't anyone bother to find out? The day Hannah Harper died began like any other in Meadow Falls. Security footage from local businesses traces her movements. Stopping for coffee at 9:15 a.m., depositing a check at Meadow Falls Credit Union at 10:30 a.m., picking up groceries at 11:45 a.m. Nothing in these mundane activities hinted at the tragedy to come. She seemed perfectly normal that morning, recalls barista Kevin Wilson. Ordered her usual, vanilla latte with an extra shot. She joked about needing the caffeine to keep up with Miles. But Hannah's final appointment that day, the visit to her lawyer's office, suggests she sensed trouble brewing. Attorney Caroline Winters breaks her client confidentiality after 15 years, with permission from Hannah's estate. Hannah came to update her will and discuss a custody issue, Winters reveals, her voice steady but somber. She was worried that her ex-husband might try to re-enter their lives. She mentioned he'd made contact after years of absence. The most revealing evidence comes from Hannah's own words. Her journal, discovered in a locked drawer of her desk, chronicles the weeks leading up to her death. The entries start optimistically. April 2nd. Miles drew a family picture today, just him and me holding hands. He hasn't asked about Jack in months. Maybe we're finally healing. But the tone shifts dramatically 3 weeks before her death. April 29th. Saw a black sedan parked across the street again. Same as yesterday. Called police, but it was gone when they arrived. May 3. Someone's been in the house, nothing taken, but things moved. Changed the locks today. May 7. Jack called. How did he get my number? Says he wants to see Miles. Says he's changed. I told him about the restraining order. He laughed. The final entry, dated the morning of her death, is chilling in its brevity. May 12th. He won't stop. Meeting with Caroline today. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. I bring these journal entries to Detective Thomas Green, who led the original investigation. Now retired, he lives in a small house on the outskirts of town. Fishing gear stacked in the garage and a police scanner still crackling in his kitchen. We never found any journal, he says, genuinely surprised. Where was it? In her desk. Locked drawer. The key was on her keychain. Green's expression darkens. That desk was searched. Thoroughly. By whom? Initially by Officer Ramirez, then more extensively by, he pauses, realization dawning, by Sam Harper. He insisted on helping, said he knew where his sister kept important documents. The implications are disturbing. If Sam removed the journal, before official evidence collection began, what else might have been altered or removed from the scene? I cross-reference the official police reports with the evidence collected. There's another glaring omission. Hannah's phone was never found, despite records confirming she had it with her that day. Her last call was to her brother Sam at 3:42 p.m., approximately 2 hours before her death. I don't remember that call, Sam claims when confronted. Maybe she was just checking in. But cell tower data tells a different story. Jack Avery's phone, registered under his new identity, pinged. The same tower as Hannah's just minutes later. They were in the same vicinity that afternoon. The timeline grows clearer, yet more troubling. Hannah visits her lawyer, expressing fears about her ex-husband. She calls her brother, possibly seeking help. Within hours, she's dead at the bottom of her staircase, and her 5-year-old son is somehow blamed for her death. Miles's statement, "Mommy fell because I was bad," takes on new significance when child psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Chen reviews the case. Children often blame themselves for bad things that happen, especially traumatic events, she explains. Additionally, if Miles witnessed an argument between adults before his mother's death, he might have internalized that as being his fault, particularly if the argument was about him. The most damning evidence against the original investigation comes from Lily Patel, Miles's babysitter, who has carried guilt for 15 years. They only used part of what Miles said, she reveals, tears streaming down her face. He actually said, "Mommy fell because I was bad. The angry man said so." When I told the police this, they said it wasn't relevant, that a child's imagination often creates angry men to explain scary situations. I pull the original transcript of Lily's police interview. Her complete statement is there, but with a line drawn through the second sentence and a note in the margin. Child's fantasy element, disregard. The question isn't just who wanted Hannah Harper dead. It's who wanted to ensure that her son took the blame, and why an entire justice system was willing to believe a 5-year-old child was capable of murder. As I leave Detective Green's house, he calls after me, his voice heavy with regret. "There's something else you should know," he says. "The night before we arrested Miles, I received a call from the district attorney's office. They said the case was being monitored at the highest levels, and to proceed as directed." He pauses. I never questioned who those highest levels were. Maybe I should have. The highest, levels? Detective Green's words haunted me. In a small town like Meadow Falls, those words could only mean one person, District Attorney William Blackwood, who later rode the publicity from Miles's case straight to the governor's mansion. The connection seemed impossible until I found a photograph. In the Meadow Falls Gazette archives, a young William Blackwood standing at a charity golf tournament, arms slung casually around Jack Avery. The caption identified them as college roommates, a relationship never disclosed during the investigation or trial. Blackwood recused himself officially from the case, explains former court clerk Marion Jenkins. But everyone knew he was pulling strings behind the scenes. His fingerprints were all over the prosecution's strategy. The physical evidence from Hannah's death never supported the theory that a 5-year-old could have caused it. Medical examiner reports, which I had to file 3 FOIA requests to obtain, noted that Hannah's injuries were consistent with significant force from an adult-sized individual. This crucial detail was omitted from trial testimony. Even more disturbing was the condition of the staircase banister. Forensics. Photographs show splintered wood where it broke away from the wall. Lab analysis detected traces of sawdust in the carpet. Fresh sawdust, suggesting the support had been deliberately weakened. No way a kindergartner could have engineered that, says Frank Donnelly, a forensic carpenter I consulted. Those cuts were made with a handsaw, and recently, the wood dust hadn't even settled fully. I tracked down Officer Ramirez, the first responder who secured the scene. Now working private security in Arizona, he agrees to speak off the record. Something wasn't right from the beginning, he admits. We found a man's boot print in the mulch beneath the living room window. Size 12. Standard procedure would be to cast it, but when I mentioned it to my superior, he said to leave it, that it was probably from the gardener. The Harper family didn't have a gardener. As I compile these discrepancies, a pattern emerges. Not of mistakes or oversights, but of deliberate misdirection. Someone with considerable influence wanted Miles to take the fall for his mother's death, and they systematically removed or altered evidence that might have pointed elsewhere. I decide to visit Miles at Northern State Correctional Facility, where he spent the past 15 years growing from a confused child into a young man who's never known freedom. The visitation room is stark and institutional. When Miles enters, I barely recognize him. Gone is the small boy from the courtroom footage. India. His place sits a wary-eyed 20-year-old with shoulders hunched as if perpetually bracing for impact. "Why are you digging all this up now?" he asks, his voice surprisingly soft. "Because you didn't kill your mother, Miles." His eyes fill with tears. I know, but no one ever believed me. When I ask what he remembers from that day, his response shatters what little faith I had left in the system that condemned him. "I remember the angry man coming to our house," he says slowly. "Mom told me to go to my room and stay there. I heard shouting, then a loud crash." He swallows hard. "When I came downstairs, she was on the floor. The angry man saw me and said it was my fault, that I was bad, that if I told anyone about him, no one would believe me anyway." "Did you ever tell the police about this man?" Miles nods, eyes haunted. "Every time, but they said I was making it up." Check the transcripts of Miles's interviews. Not a single mention of an angry man appears in any of the official records. How many people conspired to send an innocent child to prison? And what connection did District Attorney Blackwood, now Governor Blackwood, have to Jack Avery that was worth destroying a little boy's life to protect? Governor William Blackwood's office declined 5 requests for an interview. His press secretary offered only a prepared statement. The Harper case was prosecuted according to the evidence available at the time. The governor has no further comment on a matter that was properly adjudicated. Properly adjudicated. The phrase rings hollow against the mountain of inconsistencies I've uncovered, but Blackwood's reluctance to engage only deepens my resolve. Through persistent research, I uncover financial records showing that Blackwood and Jack Avery didn't just share a college dorm, they shared business interests. 3 years before Hannah's death, they co-invested in a riverfront development project that collapsed spectacularly, leaving investors with massive losses. Blackwood somehow emerged unscathed, explains financial journalist Vanessa Torres. He sold his stake just before the collapse. Avery wasn't so lucky. He lost everything and faced potential fraud charges. Those charges mysteriously disappeared around the same time Hannah Harper died and Miles was arrested. The timing can hardly be coincidental. I arrange a meeting with Judge Martin Saunders, who presided over Miles's case. Now in his 80s and retired, he initially refuses to discuss it, citing judicial ethics. When I share the evidence I've gathered, his demeanor changes. "I was under tremendous pressure during that trial," he admits. his hands trembling slightly. Phone calls in the middle of the night. Suggestions that my own family might face scrutiny if the case didn't proceed appropriately. From whom? I press. I never knew for certain, but the few times I ruled against the prosecution, Blackwood himself would appear in my chambers within the hour. The trial transcripts reveal that Judge Saunders denied multiple defense motions to introduce evidence about Jack Avery or to question the forensic analysis of the staircase. Each denial came after a recess or overnight adjournment, times when pressure could have been applied outside the courtroom. The case against Miles rested almost entirely on psychological testimony, experts claiming his behavior and drawings indicated violent tendencies. Dr. Gerald Foster, the state's primary expert witness, has since been discredited in 3 other cases for tailoring conclusions to prosecution needs. I was given selected information, Dr. Foster admits reluctantly when I track him down at a psychiatric conference. Told the child had a history of anger issues. It wasn't until years later that I learned Miles had no such history. By then, it was too late. The media coverage. The media, at the time, was equally slanted. Headlines screamed about the child killer and monster in the making. Few journalists questioned how a 5-year-old could have engineered his mother's fatal fall. One exception was Elaine Winters from the Meadow Falls Gazette, who wrote a piece questioning the A case. She was fired the next day. The paper's owner, a longtime friend of William Blackwood. They weren't just prosecuting Miles, Winters tells me, still bitter 15 years later. They were destroying any chance of alternative theories being considered. It was a coordinated campaign. The campaign extended to character assassination of Hannah herself. Court filings painted her as an unstable single mother who couldn't control her violent son, a portrayal completely at odds with testimony from her colleagues and friends. As I piece together this complex web of manipulation, I receive an anonymous envelope containing a single sheet of paper, a bank statement showing a $250,000 transfer from an offshore account to Sam Harper 3 days after he testified against his nephew. The note attached reads simply, "Follow the money. It goes higher than you think." When I call Sam Harper for comment, an automated message informs me the number has been disconnected. His neighbors report he left town suddenly last week, right after my first documentary episode aired. Who is protecting whom in this tangled network of power and deceit? And how high up does the corruption really go? Follow the money. The anonymous tip led me down a labyrinth of financial transactions, shell companies, and hidden connections that extended far beyond Meadow Falls. The offshore account that paid Sam Harper wasn't just any account. It belonged to Blackstone Holdings, a private investment firm with ties to both Governor Blackwood and real estate developments across the state. The firm's CEO, Thomas Blackwood, the governor's brother. Blackstone Holdings was set to develop the old paper mill property in Meadow Falls, explained City Council member Eleanor Chen. The only obstacle was a historical preservation claim filed by one resident, Hannah Harper. Hannah's environmental science background had led her to discover that the paper mill site contained not only historical significance, but also evidence of toxic waste that would require millions to clean up. Her petition, filed 3 weeks before her death, would have triggered a costly environmental impact study. The development would have collapsed if that petition went through, Chen confirms. Hundreds of millions in potential profits, gone. I tracked down Jonathan Myers, a former environmental inspector who worked for the state at the time. After leaving his job under mysterious circumstances, he's been working as a truck driver in Nevada. I was assigned to do a preliminary assessment of the site after Harper's complaint, Myers reveals, nervousness evident in his fidgeting hands. I found concerning levels of dioxins, PCBs, heavy metals, the works. When I submitted my report, my supervisor took it and told me to forget I ever visited the site. 2 days later, Myers was fired for procedural violations. A week after that, Hannah Harper was dead. The connection seems clear. Hannah's environmental activism threatened a massively profitable development backed by the future governor's family. But proving this connection would require evidence of direct communication between Blackwood, his brother, and Jack Avery. I filed dozens of public records requests and eventually uncover visitor logs from the district attorney's office showing Jack Avery signed in to meet with Blackwood 3 times in the month before Hannah's death. The official reason? Character witness in pending case. There was no pending case involving Avery at that time. More disturbing is what I discover when reviewing Miles's complete court records. The judge initially assigned to his case, Catherine Powell, was removed and replaced with Judge Saunders just days before the trial began. The official reason was a scheduling conflict, but Powell's calendar shows no such conflict. I was pushed off that case, Judge. Powell confirms when I finally locate her in a retirement community in Florida. Blackwood himself called me at home and suggested I might want to recuse myself for health reasons. When I refused, the chief judge reassigned the case anyway. Powell had a reputation for being meticulous and skeptical of prosecutorial overreach, exactly the kind of judge who might have questioned the flimsy evidence against Miles. As public interest in my documentary grows, so does resistance from powerful quarters. My production team reports being followed. Our research office is broken into, though. Seemingly nothing is taken. I receive anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, silence on the other end. Then comes the warning that can't be ignored. My producer's car brakes fail on a mountain road. She survives by steering into a roadside ditch, but the mechanic's verdict is unequivocal. The brake line was deliberately cut. "They're scared," my producer says from her hospital bed, her face bruised but her determination intact. It means we're getting close. Close to what? The answer emerges when a courthouse clerk reaches out with information about sealed records in the Harper case. Records sealed under a national security provision normally reserved for terrorism cases. "I've never seen anything like it," the clerk whispers during our clandestine meeting in a park. What could a child's murder trial possibly have to do with national security? What powerful secrets lie within those sealed files? And why would someone be willing to kill to keep them hidden after 15 years? National security. The classification seemed absurd for a local murder case, yet it created an almost impenetrable barrier to the truth. Almost. My investigation takes an unexpected turn when I receive a call from Rachel Winters, a former Department of Defense analyst who now works in cybersecurity. "I saw your documentary series," she says, her voice tense. "The paper mill site you mentioned. It wasn't just any industrial location. In the 1960s, it was a covert research facility for chemical weapons development. We meet at a quiet diner off the highway." Rachel slides a folder across the table, glancing nervously at the entrance. These documents were declassified 3 years ago, but nobody connected them to Meadow Falls because the location used a code name, Project Bluebird. The files reveal that the facility closed in 1972, but not before producing experimental compounds that were buried on site rather than properly disposed of. The military's own assessments warned of catastrophic health consequences if the containment measures ever failed. Hannah Harper didn't just find historical artifacts, Rachel explains. She stumbled onto one of the military's most shameful environmental cover-ups. If that information went public during the development process, the government would be liable for the cleanup costs, I finish. And anyone who knowingly developed the land could face criminal charges. Exactly. We're talking billions, not millions, and potentially dozens of officials implicated in the cover-up. The pieces begin to fit together. Governor Blackwood, then district attorney, had military connections through his brother Thomas, a former Army intelligence officer, before starting Blackstone Holdings. Their father, Senator James Blackwood, sat on the Defense Appropriations Committee during the years the facility operated. It was a family legacy of secrets, threatened by one determined elementary school teacher, who simply wanted to protect her community from toxic chemicals. I take the declassified documents to Professor Alan Morgan, an environmental chemist. His analysis is grim. "These compounds don't degrade naturally," he explains, pointing to chemical formulas I barely understand. "If groundwater reached these containers, the contamination would affect the entire county's water supply. Cancer clusters, birth defects, neurological disorders, the effects would be devastating and long-term. When I review Hannah's environmental petition with this new context, her wording jumps out. Soil samples show concerning anomalies requiring further investigation. She knew, or at least suspected, what lay beneath the abandoned paper mill. The question remains, how did a local teacher obtain information that would lead her to such a discovery? The answer comes from an unexpected source. Miles, speaking from prison, recalls a detail he'd forgotten until now. Mom had a friend who would visit late at night sometimes. They'd talk in whispers. I remember because he always brought me model airplanes, military ones. He called himself Uncle Mike, but I heard Mom call him by another name once, Mitchell. Robert Mitchell. The name appears in the declassified files as a military environmental inspector who raised concerns about the Bluebird site in the late 1990s, only to be forcibly retired. His current whereabouts? Unknown. As I dig deeper, I discover that Mitchell had indeed moved to Meadow Falls, under an assumed name following his separation from the military. He died in an apparent suicide just 1 month after Hannah's murder, his body found in his garage with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The timing seems far too convenient. I locate Mitchell's daughter in Seattle. When I mention her father's death, her bitter laugh says everything. Suicide? My father was left-handed. The gun was found in his right hand, and he had just called me the day before, excited about some evidence he'd finally obtained that would blow the whole thing wide open. Does that sound like a man planning to kill himself? What information had Mitchell discovered? And how far would someone go to ensure it remained buried alongside Hannah Harper's inconvenient truth? Robert Mitchell's daughter, Elaine, provides me with access to her father's personal effects, boxes of documents, journals, and hard drives that had been in storage since his death. Among them, I find a sealed envelope addressed to Hannah Harper, never delivered. Inside is a USB drive and a handwritten note. Hannah, final proof of site contamination and the cover-up. Be careful who sees this. Lives are at stake. RM. The D. Drive contains environmental test results showing chemical signatures matching the declassified Bluebird compounds, along with internal emails between Thomas Blackwood and government officials discussing how to manage the situation discreetly. Most damning is a memo addressed to then-District Attorney William Blackwood from his brother. Hannah Harper has become a problem. Her petition could trigger federal oversight. Jack A. says he can convince her to drop it, but if not, we need more permanent solutions. Remember what's at stake. The timestamp: 3 days before Hannah's murder. I take this evidence to FBI Special Agent Lori Chen, who specializes in public corruption cases. Initially skeptical, her expression changes as she reviews the documents. This merits investigation, she says carefully. But I need to warn you. Cases involving powerful political figures require authorization from higher levels. 3 days later, she calls to inform me the case has been reassigned to another division. When I press for details, she admits, orders from Washington. I'm sorry. The stonewalling is frustrating, but not surprising. If this conspiracy reaches as high as I suspect, conventional law enforcement channels may be compromised. I decide to approach the case from another angle. Jack Avery, the most vulnerable link in the chain. After our previous confrontation, he disappeared from his apartment, but his probation officer, from an unrelated fraud conviction, provides a lead: a cabin in the mountains owned by a shell company linked to Blackstone Holdings. When I arrive at the remote location, I find Avery nervous, agitated, and drinking heavily. His initial hostility fades as I reveal what I've discovered. You're a dead man, he says, almost sympathetically. They'll never let this story get out. Who is they, Jack? Who ordered Hannah's murder? He laughs bitterly. Nobody ordered anything. Blackwood just made it clear what needed to happen if I wanted my legal problems to disappear. I was supposed to scare her into dropping the petition. But something went wrong, I prompt. Hannah wasn't easily frightened. She had evidence, real evidence about what was buried there. Said she'd already made copies. When I threatened her, she laughed and said I'd be in prison before I could touch her or Miles. His expression darkens. pushed her. I didn't mean for her to fall, but the banister, I'd weakened it earlier, thinking I might stage an accident if necessary. And Miles saw you. The kid came downstairs right after it happened. I panicked, told him it was his fault, that no one would believe him if he said otherwise. Avery drains his glass. I never thought they'd actually arrest him. He was 5, for God's sake. I figured they'd investigate, find my prints, question me. But Blackwood made sure that didn't happen. The perfect solution to both problems. Hannah's petition died with her, and they had someone to blame who couldn't defend himself. I got my charges dropped, and Blackwood's development proceeded without environmental scrutiny. I'm recording this conversation, but Jack doesn't seem to care anymore. His next words chill me to the bone. You know what the worst part is? The development was never the main concern. It was what they found when they started preliminary excavation. Something the military didn't even know was there. What did they find, Jack? His eyes meet mine, suddenly sober despite the alcohol. Evidence of human testing, decades of it, and logs showing who authorized. Before he can elaborate, headlights sweep across the cabin windows. Jack's face drains of color. They followed you. Get out. Now! As I slip out the back door into the darkness, I hear car doors slamming and harsh voices demanding entry. What happens next will haunt me forever. 3 gunshots echo through the mountains as I flee through the dense forest behind Jack Avery's cabin. I don't stop running until I'm miles away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, hands trembling as I call my producer from a prepaid phone. They killed him, I whisper, the reality of what I've witnessed sinking. They killed Jack to silence him. The next morning, local news reports a tragic hunting accident at a remote cabin. Jack Avery, identified by his alias, was reportedly cleaning his rifle when it discharged. No mention of multiple gunshots. No mention of the men who stormed the cabin. Just another convenient death in a case built on convenient lies. I have Jack's confession on record, but it's not enough. Without corroborating evidence, it's my word against the official story. And as the past 15 years have shown, official stories have a way of prevailing in Meadow Falls. With Jack dead, I turn to the one person who might know more than they've revealed. Sam Harper, Hannah's brother and the first person to find her body. After disappearing when my documentary began airing, he's resurfaced in a small coastal town 3 states away. I've been expecting you, he says when I knock on his door. His face is haggard, eyes darting nervously to the street behind me. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. Inside his spartanly furnished apartment, Sam pours himself a generous whiskey. His hands shake slightly. I didn't kill Hannah. You need to know that. But you helped. Cover it up, I counter. You testified against your own nephew. You let a child go to prison for something he didn't do. Sam's face crumples. I had no choice. They had evidence linking me to other legal problems. Said they'd make it disappear if I played along, or make sure I went away for decades if I didn't. They being Blackwood, his people. I never dealt with him directly, always intermediaries. But yes, ultimately Blackwood. I press him about what he saw that day, what he might have removed from the scene before police arrived. His answers confirm my suspicions. He took Hannah's journal and phone, both of which contained evidence about the paper mill site and her communications with Robert Mitchell. Where are they now? I destroyed the phone. The journal. He hesitates. I kept it. Insurance, you know. Hidden where no one would think to look. Sam retrieves a waterproof container from his bathroom toilet tank. Inside is Hannah's journal, preserved in a sealed plastic bag. The final entries match what I've already seen, but there are additional pages torn out and hidden separately, containing coordinates, chemical formulas, and names of military personnel associated with Project Bluebird. Hannah was building a case, Sam explains, not just about environmental contamination, but about who was responsible: high-ranking officials, corporate executives, military commanders, people with everything to lose if this became public. Among the names, Senator James Blackwood, Governor William Blackwood's father. This goes beyond Meadow Falls, Sam continues, his voice lowering as if the walls might be listening. The human testing Mitchell discovered? It wasn't just at one facility. It was a nationwide program using unwitting subjects. People in hospitals, prisons, even schools in low-income areas. Thousands of victims over decades. The scope of the conspiracy is staggering. No wonder they were willing to sacrifice a child to keep it hidden. As night falls, Sam grows increasingly paranoid, checking windows and jumping at sounds. I suggest we leave, find somewhere safer to continue our conversation. There is nowhere safe, he says flatly. Not from them, but there's someone else you should talk to. Someone who knows even more than I do. He scribbles a name and address on a piece of paper, then burns it after I memorize. Dewey or Margaret Winters, former military nurse. She worked at the facility in the 60s. She's the one who first contacted Mitchell with her concerns. Why hasn't she come forward before now? Sam's laugh is hollow. Would you? Knowing what happened to Hannah and Mitchell? Knowing what they did to a 5-year-old boy to keep this quiet? As I leave, Sam grabs my arm, his eyes desperate. Whatever you do, don't tell anyone I helped you. They're watching. They're always watching. 3 days later, Sam Harper is found dead in his apartment. The official cause, suicide. Margaret Winters lives in a modest nursing home 2 states away from Meadow Falls. At 83, her body is frail, but her mind remains razor sharp. When I mention Hannah Harper's name, she motions for me to close the door. I've been following your documentary, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Been waiting for someone to finally dig up the truth. Thought I'd take it to my grave. Margaret was a military nurse at the Meadow Falls facility from 1964 to 1971. What began as a chemical weapons research program evolved into something far more sinister under the direction of a classified division she refers to only as the Institute. They started with volunteer soldiers, she explains, then prisoners, then others, people who wouldn't be missed, mental patients, orphans, drifters. Her hands tremble as she continues. The records were coded, but I saw enough to know. They were testing mind control techniques, behavior modification using chemicals, psychological conditioning, even surgical interventions. From a hidden compartment in her Bible, Margaret produces a small, weathered notebook filled with names, dates, and observations written in a cramped medical shorthand. I couldn't stop it, but I documented everything. When the facility officially closed in 72, they buried the evidence, literally. Containment chambers beneath the main building. But the program never really ended. It just went deeper underground. Among the names in her records, Dr. James Blackwood, the future senator and father of Governor William Blackwood, listed as consulting physician on dozens of experimental procedures. Senator Blackwood built his medical career on research from those experiments, Margaret continues. Patents, publications, prestigious appointments, all stemming from unethical human experimentation he never acknowledged. His son knew everything, helped bury the evidence when James began his political career. The paper mill development wasn't just about real estate profits or environmental liability. It was about permanently sealing access to evidence of crimes that could destroy a political dynasty and implicate dozens of still living officials. Robert Mitchell contacted me in the late 90s, Margaret says. He'd found references to the facility while investigating contamination sites. We started comparing notes. When he disappeared, I went into hiding. Changed my name, but I kept watching Meadow Falls from a distance. She produces a carefully preserved newspaper clipping about Hannah Harper's environmental petition. This brave woman had no idea what she'd stumbled into. Mitchell had just begun to tell her the full story when her voice trails off. I show her Hannah's journal, recovered from Sam Harper. Margaret points to a series of numbers and letters that had mystified me. These are patient identifiers. Hannah was mapping not just the chemicals, but the human victims. She found their burial site. The revelation is sickening. The abandoned paper mill wasn't just built over toxic chemicals. It was built over graves. Evidence not just of environmental crimes, but of murder and human experimentation on an industrial scale. Why hasn't anyone else come forward in all these years? I ask. Margaret's smile is sad. Who says they go? Haven't tried? Remember the reporter who questioned Miles's conviction and was fired the next day? The environmental inspector who committed suicide? The judge who was removed from the case? Anyone who got close to the truth met similar fates. Before I leave, Margaret hands me a sealed envelope. I've kept this 40 years, waiting for someone courageous enough to use it. Inside is the name of someone still alive who can verify everything. Someone who was there, who participated, and who has lived with the guilt ever since. Why haven't they spoken out? Fear, she says simply, and shame, but mostly fear of the Blackwoods. This person will only speak if guaranteed protection. As I take the envelope, Margaret grips my hand with surprising strength. You realize what you're up against? These people sentenced a child to life in prison to protect their secret. They've killed too. Maintain their power. They won't hesitate to silence you too. I know, I tell her, but if we don't expose this now, Miles Harper will die in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and the real criminals will never face justice. Margaret nods slowly. Open the envelope only when you're ready to. Make your final move. The person named inside was closer to the Blackwoods than anyone realizes, and has the evidence to bring down their entire empire. The envelope from Margaret Winters burns in my pocket like a live coal, but I resist the temptation to open it immediately. Timing will be crucial. One wrong move and evidence will disappear. Witnesses will go silent and Miles Harper will remain forgotten in his cell. Instead, I focus on building an airtight case with the evidence already gathered. My producer and I convert a hotel suite into a makeshift war room, walls covered with timelines, photographs, and connections. We operate under strict security protocols, burner phones, encrypted communications, constantly changing locations. The story has grown far beyond a wrongful conviction. It now encompasses decades of corruption, human experimentation, environmental crimes, and a cover-up reaching the highest levels of state government. Too big, perhaps, for local authorities to handle, or to be trusted with. I decide to visit Miles again, to share what I've discovered, and prepare him for the storm to come. The prison administration initially denies my request, citing security concerns. It takes a public attorney and threats of media exposure to gain access. Miles looks different this time. A spark of hope has replaced the resignation in his eyes. People are talking about me in here, he says. Guards, other inmates. They've seen your documentary. Some of them believe I'm innocent. I explain what I've learned about Project Bluebird, the Blackwood family's involvement, and the real reason behind his mother's death. His reaction surprises me. Mom knew something was wrong with that old factory. He nods. She used to make me promise never to play near. It said the ground there was sick. Miles shares a memory that had been dismissed during his trial as fantasy, watching his mother collect soil samples late at night, putting them in labeled containers. She told him they were playing science detectives. The prosecution claimed I was making up stories, Miles says bitterly. Said it proved I couldn't tell fantasy from reality. As our conversation continues, Miles reveals something even more significant, a hiding place in his childhood home, where Hannah kept her most important documents. It was our secret spot, he explains, behind the Valse panel in my closet. Mom called it our treasure chest. We'd leave notes for each other there. The Harper house has changed hands multiple times since Hannah's death, but county records show it's currently vacant, foreclosed after the last owners defaulted on their mortgage. Breaking in would be illegal, but so much about this case has operated outside the bounds of law that one more transgression seems trivial by comparison. That night, my producer and I approach the darkened Harper house, equipment minimal, flashlights, cameras, gloves. The neighborhood is quiet, most windows dark. The lock on the back door gives way easily. Foreclosed properties rarely receive proper security. Inside, dust covers abandoned furniture. Faded rectangles on walls mark where pictures once hung. We make our way to Miles's former bedroom, now empty except for built-in shelves and an open closet. The secret spot takes time to locate, a section of baseboard that slides aside when pressed in the right spot, revealing a small cavity in the wall. Inside, we find a waterproof document case, untouched for 15 years. The contents are extraordinary, Hannah's original soil test results, correspondence with environmental agencies, and most damning of all, photographs of what appear to be human remains partially exposed at the paper mill site. Notes on the back identify the exact location and date, 3 weeks before her death. Also in the cache is a DVD labeled simply Insurance. We take everything and leave as quietly as we came. Back at our hotel, we play the DVD. The screen flickers to life, showing Hannah Harper sitting at her kitchen table, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," she begins, "it means something has happened to me. What I'm about to share puts me in danger, but the truth needs to be documented." What follows is Hannah's detailed testimony about everything she discovered, and a name that makes my blood run cold. The same name I discover when I finally open Margaret Winter's envelope that she had identified as the key witness, who could bring down the Blackwood Empire. Dr. Thomas Blackwood, the governor's brother, architect of the development project, and according to both Hannah and Margaret, the man who had continued his father's secret research program long after the official facility closed. Dr. Thomas Blackwood, brilliant medical researcher, successful businessman, and according to both Hannah Harper and Margaret Winters, the mastermind behind decades of illegal human experimentation. Finding him proves surprisingly easy. Unlike his politically cautious brother, Thomas maintains a high profile, regularly appearing at medical conferences and charity galas. I arrange an interview under false pretenses, a documentary about medical innovations in neurological research. Thomas agrees readily, perhaps seeing it as an opportunity to enhance his reputation as a humanitarian scientist. We meet at his research facility outside the state capitol. The building is sleek, modern, intimidating. Much like the man himself, Thomas Blackwood exudes confidence and charm, showing no sign that he suspects my true purpose. "My work has always focused on advancing human potential," he explains smoothly as we tour his laboratories. "My father inspired me to pursue medicine as a way to help people." I let him continue his carefully crafted narrative, nodding appreciatively while my hidden camera captures every word. Then, in a quiet moment, I change course. "Tell me about Project Bluebird, Dr. Blackwood." His expression freezes momentarily before recovering. "I'm not familiar with that term." "That's strange because I have documentation showing you were not only familiar with it, but actively continued the research." His eyes narrow. "This interview is over. Before I go, I'd like your comment on these." I slide forward photographs from Hannah's cache, images of human remains at the paper mill site. The change is immediate and chilling. All pretense of civility vanishes as Blackwood presses an intercom button. "Security to my office. Now." "One last question," I say quickly. "Did you order Hannah Harper's murder, or did you leave that to your brother?" His response is unexpected, a laugh, cold and dismissive. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes far beyond one nosy teacher or one small town. What we created at Bluebird has shaped national policy for decades." "Do you really think they'll let you expose that?" Armed security guards appear, escorting me out. As I'm led away, Blackwood calls after me. "Ask yourself why a 5-year-old child was convicted on such flimsy evidence. It wasn't just our influence. The system wanted it buried. All of it." I leave. With exactly what I needed. Thomas Blackwood's implicit confession captured on camera. But his words haunt me. How deep does this conspiracy really go? And who are they? The shadowy powers beyond even the Blackwood family. Back at our hotel, my producer and I prepare to release everything we've gathered. The environmental data, Hannah's video testimony, Margaret's records, and now Thomas Blackwood's veiled admission. Before we can upload the files, an urgent message arrives from Miles's attorney. They're moving him. Tonight. Off the books transfer to a maximum security facility. We're filing emergency motions but need immediate public pressure. Someone knows we're close to breaking the story. Moving Miles to a higher security prison would make him less accessible, more isolated, and potentially in greater danger. We have no choice but to accelerate our timeline, even if it means releasing evidence before it's fully corroborated. The first segments go live within the hour, a special online broadcast of our findings, including Hannah's own testimony from beyond the grave. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupts. News outlets pick up the story. Lucy Free Miles Harper begins trending nationally. As public outrage builds, we receive word that the prison transfer has been temporarily halted by judicial order. We've bought Miles some time, but also fully exposed ourselves to the forces that have killed to keep these secrets. That night, as we prepare, the final and most damning segments of our report, I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched. The question isn't whether they'll come for us, but when. They come before dawn, not with guns or threats, but with something far more effective. Legal documents. Federal agents deliver a national security letter prohibiting further publication of classified information related to historical defense research. Our hotel room is raided, equipment confiscated, files seized, but we anticipated this move. Critical evidence has already been backed up to secure servers, accessible to trusted journalists nationwide. If anything happens to us, the full story will be released automatically. The attempted suppression only intensifies public interest. Major media outlets begin asking uncomfortable questions. Why would a decades-old research project warrant national security intervention? What connection could it possibly have to a child's murder conviction? Governor William Blackwood calls an emergency press conference, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. These reckless allegations are politically motivated attacks on my family's legacy of public service, he declares, voice slightly unsteady. The Harper case was adjudicated properly, according to evidence available at the time. But even as he speaks, cracks appear in the wall of silence. A former aide to Senator James Blackwood comes forward with records of meetings between the senator and military officials regarding Project Bluebird. A retired judge admits to being pressured to seal records related to the paper mill site. Most significantly, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the child psychologist who had reviewed Miles's case, holds her own press conference. I've examined additional evidence that was withheld during the original trial, she announces. In my professional opinion, Miles Harper could not possibly have caused his mother's death. His conviction represents a catastrophic failure of our justice system. The tide of public opinion shifts dramatically. Protests form outside the governor's mansion and the Akshua prison holding Miles. Legislators call for investigations. The Department of Justice acknowledges reviewing the case. Then comes the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Thomas Blackwood, perhaps seeing the inevitable collapse of the conspiracy, makes a decision that will save himself at his brother's expense. Through his attorney, he offers a deal: full testimony about the cover-up in exchange for immunity from prosecution. His deposition is devastating. He confirms everything: the human experimentation at Bluebird, his father's involvement, the toxic burials, Hannah's discovery, the coordinated effort to silence her, and finally, the calculated decision to frame her 5-year-old son. William said a child that young would never serve serious time. Thomas testifies. The case would eventually be overturned on appeal, but by then the development would be complete. Evidence buried under concrete, and public interest moved on to other scandals. What they hadn't counted on was prosecutor Melissa Cortez's ambition and the judge's intimidation, resulting in an unprecedented sentence that locked Miles away for life. An outcome even the Blackwoods hadn't anticipated, but one they were willing to accept to protect their secrets. As Thomas's testimony becomes public, the final pieces fall into place. Governor William Blackwood resigns, facing multiple criminal charges. Federal investigators descend on the paper mill site, halting all development and beginning the grim work of excavation. Most importantly, Miles Harper's conviction is vacated by emergency court order. After 15 years of wrongful imprisonment, the gates finally open to release him. I'm there when Miles walks free, cameras capturing the moment for millions of viewers who have followed his story. The shy, hesitant young man I first met in prison seems transformed, standing taller, eyes clear and focused on the future rather than the past. What will you do now? I ask him as we drive away from the prison. His answer is simple but profound. Help other kids like me. The forgotten ones. The ones the system chewed up and spit out. Victory feels complete, but something still troubles me. Thomas Blackwood's immunity deal seems too convenient, the resolution too neat, and his final words during deposition haunt me. You think this ends with us? Bluebird was just one facility among dozens. The program evolved, went deeper. It never stopped. What larger conspiracy might still be operating in the shadows? And how many other innocent lives have been sacrificed to protect it? 6 months after Miles Harper's release, I stand at the edge of the former paper mill site, now transformed into something between a crime scene and an archaeological dig. Federal investigators in hazmat suits meticulously excavate the contaminated ground, uncovering decades of buried secrets. So far, we've recovered remains of at least 37 individuals, explains Dr. Anita Sharma, the forensic anthropologist leading the recovery effort. Based on preliminary analysis, these deaths occurred between 1964 and 1975. Many show evidence of surgical procedures consistent with experimental brain surgery. The full scope of Project Bluebird is finally coming to light, exposing horrors beyond what even Margaret Winters had documented. Records recovered from the Blackwood estate reveal a program that began as military research but evolved into something more insidious, a private endeavor to develop mind control techniques for both political and commercial applications. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Thomas Blackwood's immunity deal protected him from prosecution, but not from justice of another kind. Found dead in his home of an apparent heart attack, the official investigation ruled natural causes. Few questioned this convenient ending. Few except me. An anonymous source within the medical examiner's office shares toxicology results never made public. Traces of a synthetic compound in Thomas's bloodstream, matching formulas developed at Bluebird. The same compound appears in Hannah Harper's autopsy results, previously attributed to environmental contamination. The truth hits like a thunderbolt. Thomas wasn't just continuing his father's research, he was using it. The mind-altering chemicals developed at Bluebird had become weapons in the Blackwood arsenal, deployed against anyone who threatened their empire. But who silenced Thomas? If not his brother William, already in custody awaiting trial, then who? The answer emerges from the most unexpected source: Miles Harper himself. During his years in prison, Miles had methodically collected information from other inmates, guards, and visitors, piecing together a network of influence that extended far beyond the Blackwoods. Project Bluebird wasn't just one family's secret, Miles explains as we review his meticulous notes. It was proof of concept for programs that went national. The techniques refined there were adopted by intelligence agencies, pharmaceutical companies, even political campaigns. The Blackwoods weren't the masters, they were middlemen. Evidence supports his theory. Financial records show corporations with government contracts funneling millions through Blackstone Holdings. Military documents reference civilian applications of research originally conducted at Bluebird. Political operatives from both major parties appear in photographs with Senator James Blackwood, despite public political opposition. My mother didn't just stumble onto environmental contamination or unethical experiments, Miles continues. She found the nexus where corporate power, military research, and political influence converge. That's why they were willing to sacrifice a child to keep it hidden. That's why they're still killing to protect it. Our investigation has exposed one layer of corruption, but peeled back the surface to reveal something far more pervasive. Miles Harper is free, but complete justice remains elusive. The system that imprisoned him remains largely intact, still capable of burying inconvenient truths and sacrificing innocent lives. As we conclude our documentary series, I ask Miles if he feels his story has reached its ending. His response is both chilling and inspiring. This was never just about me. It's about every person silenced by powerful interests, every truth buried for profit or political convenience. My mother died trying to expose something bigger than one corrupt family. The least I can do is continue her work. The case that began with a child sentenced to life imprisonment has exposed a cancer at the heart of American power, a conspiracy of influence that transcends political parties, outlasts administrations, and treats human lives as acceptable collateral damage. Miles Harper lost 15 years of his life. Hannah Harper lost her life entirely. Their sacrifice has cracked open the door to secrets long buried. The question remains whether society has the courage to look unflinchingly at what lies beyond that door, or whether we will allow it to swing shut once again, sealing away uncomfortable truths in favor of comforting fictions. As for me, I've learned that the most dangerous criminals rarely wear prison uniforms. They wear business suits, judicial robes, and political pins. And their greatest weapon isn't force, but our willingness to believe that systems meant to protect us couldn't possibly be corrupted so completely. The truth, as Hannah Harper discovered, is always more complicated, more disturbing, and more necessary than the stories we tell ourselves. And sometimes it takes a child to expose the monstrous behavior of those we call adults.